Sorry, I'm laughing so hard. I just filmed a disclaimer in which I started joking about the chaotic start to my last two episodes, last week's being because of audio issues, and then it didn't record the audio on what I was trying to say now. Just wanted to point out that throughout this episode of Before the Whistle, I accidentally and will continue to refer to the quarterback for UNT, Chandler Rogers, as Chandler Jones. Went on a tangent about UAB. My brain spit out Jacob Zeno, and then I panic went to Chandler Jones in my head. And alas, not a reflection of my understanding of the team, game, or the players, simply my mouth moving a lot faster than my brain. In fairness, I did disclaim that in episode 1 of the show. And just a reminder to sometimes write down the names of players and not just the numbers in your notes. So with that, I hope this went through, and let's enjoy this episode. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy Hudak, and I'm here to recap the homecoming victory for the Green Wave in their 35-28 win over the North Texas Mean Green, who certainly came in a lot meaner than anticipated. But ultimately, Tulane went 1-0 and now are bowl eligible and have 6-1 starts back-to-back for the first time since 1930 to 1931. So again, as many milestones as I thought we got out of the way decidedly last season, I guess there's still a few to hang their hat on this year. It was certainly a game that I think fans didn't have the best feeling leaving the stadium on Saturday. And I could kind of agree with that a little more until just completing my rewatch right now. I do just have to say that I feel like there's always something in the air for homecoming, just going back to, my 2 as a sideline reporter. This is my 3rd as a sideline reporter, 11th as an alumni, but my first season is the Tulsa overtime loss where, Tulane misses something like a 24-yard field goal and then I believe conceded a touchdown to end that game in overtime for Tulsa. And then last year, they beat Memphis, but it was either they went up 31 or 35-0 at half. And then Memphis came back pretty handily in that second half. What I remember from that game were a 90-yard punt return for a touchdown by Jaquan Jackson, which I believe is the second longest in school history and tied some record of some sort. And then the game ending with an interception by Jarius Monroe in the end zone. And that was his first time playing as that cornerback. Jaden Kennedy had been the cornerback opposite Lance Robinson last season. He tore his ACL in the middle of that game. So it just kind of took me back to that game in a weird way because, Jarius Monroe got hurt in this matchup, unfortunately, his status of which is unknown. And I did see him try to go back in towards the end of the game for a few series, but it just goes to show you how quickly things can matter with one key injury here and there. And then all the injuries to the defensive line as well going into this game, something that was a point of strength for Tulane going into this matchup. Shouldn't say all over the defensive line, but, Angelo Anderson goes down against Memphis. And then Adonis Freelu was also out of the game as well. And so that's 2 depth pieces. So you're kind of rotating Keith Cooper, Darius Hodges, Devin Deal on those edge and the dog roll. And then we saw a little bit of Matthew Fobbs-White, who almost had a forced fumble, I'm pretty sure, in that game. And so seeing those issues play out in real time, it's interesting. I check in, with my dad who watches these games on TV, and it's hard a lot of the time for the TV broadcast to necessarily pick up who's coming into each play and, seeing guys kind of come in on the depth chart for Tulane among the secondary. But it stuck out to me that early on in the game, we saw Rayshawn Pleasant come in, and he really hasn't had that much time playing at all, if any, of this season, at least at that cornerback role. And they definitely picked on him a little bit. Then we've seen them again bring in Kentrell Webb. And I think a lot of that could come from the fact that Darius Swanson at safety, they also lost before the game as well. And so, again, you had good health going into the bye, but you play a really hard conference rival in Memphis, and you just get a little bit beat up. The good news, and as I reported in my broadcast, is all those guys I just mentioned are expected to be back in the next 2 weeks or so. And so to see, again, Tulane get through this game with what they were able to kind of deal with on the defensive side of the ball, also using a lot more zone coverage and off coverage, which didn't really work all the time, but you saw them get burned in man coverage last weekend. And that was with the personnel that you would want running that press coverage and that man coverage. And so I just wonder about guys like Jarius Monroe going down and whether or not that changes the coverage scheme. And then really just credit again to North Texas, who I think came in with a hell of a game plan. And you have to remember that Tulane is the hunted now. And that also means that they are getting the best game plan for all of these teams. I mean, I thought UAB had a really impressive offense when they came in here, and same goes with North Texas. I thought their secondary was a lot better than advertised with, as many points as they give up, but they play a 3-3-5. And while you saw that really kind of pay off among the offensive line and see them really be able to hold that pocket and get that run game going, it makes it a very difficult day to try to get passes off when there's 8 guys dropping back into coverage. It took me back a lot to the Kansas State win last year, 17-10 victory, where, the defense made 4 fourth down stops, but the offense only scored 17 points. And I'm pretty sure there was 1 passing touchdown to Tyreek James in that game, but it was mostly Michael Pratt on the ground. And that was the game plan going into that matchup. And you really saw him take off in the fourth quarter. And I would be curious again, Pratt is, for all intents and purposes, healthy and ready to go. Is he, is 100% spring chicken best? I'm not entirely sure. And I think, again, that is something that you might not ever know. And then there's some plays where, it looked like he got cleated and had a gash on his leg. And sometimes guys, again, just get banged up during these games, but you can just tell that he's not totally back to form in the way that he's running, but he's really, really close. Again, close enough for anything and close enough for him to be doing a little much in the air when you'd sometimes like him to slide, but he did start sliding a lot more in this game. And yeah, he threw an interception earlier on in the game. I'm always more curious about how players respond after they throw interceptions. And again, to go back to the Kansas State game, Pratt also threw a pick in that matchup as well. And I'm pretty sure led them down the field for a rushing touchdown drive in that next, drive after, I believe, the defense made yet another fourth down stop. Here, Tulane throws another touchdown after Pratt threw an interception where the defense did hold them to 3 and out and force them to punt. I believe they had 2 3 and outs in the first half of this game. One of those coming after that interception thrown by Michael Pratt. And so they gave the offense basically an opportunity to go right back and rewrite the ship. And, he ran on the first play and then he threw a 28-yard bomb to Chris Brazel right on the next play. And that really reset things. And then that led to another touchdown by the offense. So again, Tulane goes into halftime 21-0, and clock control played, I think, a large portion towards the end of that game. And again, you're seeing them really start to get the run game going, really start to form that out behind Mekhi Hughes. And the O-line definitely, again, really stepped up in this game and made these huge holes for Mekhi Hughes. But there were 2 kind of crazy things that happened in the first half. I shouldn't say crazy, actually. There was a fumble recovery on the 1-yard line where I actually saw Parker Waters, our photographer, had a photo of the ball very clearly being out by Michael Pratt in getting that touchback early on in the game. And I'm not one for hypotheticals, but I just feel like it's necessary to kind of go back to these decisions, because it stuck out at one point where they went for fourth down and the announcers just said, well, forget analytics, apparently, and really seeing Tulane implement that kind of Philly push by Bauman and Hughes on fourth down. But to get back to my point, again, I'm not one to go over hypotheticals, but if we just look at the point where they fumbled at the 1-yard line for Tulane, I mean, 1 more yard and that's a touchdown for them. So they're probably up 17-0 at that point instead of wherever they were at that point. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Too many hypotheticals, too little time. That was following this one. Either they take the touchdown there or they end up kicking a field goal, either way. And then the following drive after that, they end up turning it over on downs. This is where I was going with the hypothetical. And a lot of people were saying, oh, why didn't they take the field goal there? And yeah, in hindsight, it probably seems a little more prudent to kick said field goal. But again, there's so many analytics and decision-making that goes on. And then a lot of the time, I think it's just going with your gut, because I don't think any analytics book ever said to throw a touchdown on 4th and 9, but that's what Tulane did against UAB. And so I just think that there is definitely, again, we're all couch quarterback coaches, whatever I'm trying to say. And we're all looking back at this in hindsight. Easier said than done in real time, but that fumble at the 1-yard line doesn't happen. They score a touchdown there, kick a field goal instead of turning it over on downs the following play, which might be a rollover effect again of not getting the touchdown from that first play. Then you're either looking at a 13-0 or a 17-0 lead at that point. And hypothetically, either a 21-0 or a 24-0 lead after Tulane scored that second touchdown that I was just talking about. Then Michael Pratt throws again his one and only interception of the day. Then he goes back in and responds. And again, Tulane goes up 21-0 at halftime. In this hypothetical land, it's either 28-0 or 31-0. All of that to be said, it makes it look a lot worse when, yeah, the score ends up being tied with the touchdowns here and there in the second half. But again, there were definitely rollover decisions from the first half that had those things gone one way or another. And that's why I always say, yeah, Tulane could win out, and it's more likely than not that they should beat every team in front of them. But sometimes all it takes is a bad snap or a bad call, one way or the other. I mean, it's 60 minutes of unpredictable football. And again, something like that can happen. You almost saw a touchback on the other side of the ball in the second half for UNT, which again puts Tulane in a very different position because UNT ended up retaining that, recovering that fumble, and then scoring a touchdown on that drive. So all that to say, I think, again, you can analyze a game to death, but watching this game through and through, I take a lot of notes. I have all this information about how many times they ran out of, off of an earned first down, how many times they passed off of a first down, what their tendencies were in each couple ones of those. And there's definitely a time and place to delve into those. But if you just watch this game and watch how it played out, the defense did its job. I mean, they held them to a shutout in the first half. And then the second half is where it gets a little hairy. But you ultimately saw all three phases of the game really step up when they needed to. And as much as we're talking about, oh, well, Tulane should blow these teams out, or, it was a little more expected that the offense would have a field day. And that's kind of what happened. I mean, if you're looking at it from that perspective, their defense gave up 35 points. Their offense scored 28. That's pretty even to, what we saw going into this. The fact that this is Jacob Zeno, right? No, it is not Jacob Zeno. Chandler Jones has only thrown one interception all year. And somewhere through the game, it said he's thrown 187 consecutive passes after that point without an interception. He didn't throw one on Saturday either. And he just really was a very methodical quarterback that definitely saw when Tulane was kind of hurting in the secondary and picked that apart a little bit. And that kind of made up for those scoring drives, if you will. But I do understand, again, that it did, again, look a little worse than it did upon rewatch. So I will break down that second half. And a lot of what you were looking at, too, is just, two completely different styles of offense. Just looking again at those splits, their quarterback threw 51 passes. Pass attempts. He completed 35 of those for 343 passing yards. That's a lot of passes thrown in a game. And yeah, it's definitely something that on those drives, it was just kind of these short routes that just kind of ate up the field really quickly, but they did a really good job of that tempo offense and not allowing Tulane to make substitutions. I think you're really seeing how every best game plan really kind of takes form against Tulane. And a lot of that is film study, probably noticing that they got a little thin at the defensive line. And then again, seeing those in-game injuries and knowing that you can kind of throw to that area in the secondary. And again, it stuck out to me that they were in a lot more zone coverage this week. It was just such a stark contrast to what we saw last weekend in Memphis, where they were primarily in man coverage the entire game, and you saw them get burned quite a bit. So where they gave up those 21 unanswered points. And then again, you saw that happen here, but a lot more of it in off coverage, and some of those touchdowns and completions down the field, it was just kind of mystifying. The safety coverage was on one side, and I unfortunately don't have the film to look at in front of me, and the broadcast view is very frustrating trying to analyze a secondary. So I frankly don't remember what went on down the field a few times, but just again, felt like that quarterback made really quick reads and a good notion of where the safety coverage was going. And they did a lot with their formations where they had these stacked formations on both sides. They had one play where they had their O-line in really wide splits, and credit to Tulane for not getting fooled whatsoever on those kind of eye candy plays. But that ultimately, when you have those kind of bunches out there, that's stretching your second and third level defense. And, Cam Pettisco and the anchor having to draw over there. The linebackers are trying to see, should I read the backfield or do I need to kind of seal the edge here? And that kind of makes the middle of the field just prime for those quick, short passes and taking advantage of linebackers in coverage. And so again, I think you just saw a lot of that going on here. But ultimately, again, this game really came down to that stretch starting the third quarter where Tulane comes out and they go 3-and-out, and it's a punt, and not necessarily the best when, you're looking at having a second half showing to start strong. UNT scores their first touchdown of the day following that 3-and-out by Tulane. And that was one of the series where it did look noticeable that they were picking on certain defensive backs. I know AJ Hampton, he came in a lot for Jarius Monroe, and just the size difference of those two alone is difficult. But I did hear a really, again, promising sideline stuff where Jarius Monroe was kind of coaching AJ Hampton up after one of those plays that he allowed a touchdown, saying, you taught me these moves on, if they're stuttering on the line of scrimmage, that they're going to run a fade. And even if you're in off coverage, how how to play press man coverage and just trust your instincts. And it's just stuck out to me this year that there's just been so much more in-game coaching by players that, I mean, again, it just seems more noticeable this year. And that might be a byproduct of those TV timeouts. But again, those plays really kind of took over at some point. But following that, it's 21-7 now. Tulane goes down the field and they throw another touchdown, 10 play, 75-yard drive, eat up 5.5 minutes on the clock. This was one of the 4th down conversions they had where the announcer said, I guess just forget analytics. And then I liked what they did here. There were some series where, Mekhi Hughes would be kind of going strong. Then they would put in Arnold Barnes and it would kind of falter. And you're just kind of thinking, why take out Hughes in the first place? But they gave Arnold Barnes the chance to really make a play on a 3rd down conversion. And he did so. And that ultimately set up the touchdown throw to Bauman, in which Pratt was getting hit like hell as he threw that ball. I mean, again, say what you will about him, but mental toughness and physical toughness are just in spades with him. And that's something that, again, when talking about making that transition over to the NFL and what scouts are really looking for in these matchups, they're looking for how he responded after the interception in which they threw a touchdown. They had that touchdown drive. They're looking at those plays where you're going to get hit, but trusting your receiver and sticking through that. And that's, again, something that really sticks out for guys separating in the NFL, is being able to really withstand that and remain tough in the pocket, especially when you get to the NFL and it's Aaron Donald coming down and not, one of these defensive linemen here. But that puts Tulane up 28-7. And again, to go back to those hypotheticals before, this game just seems a lot less close if those things hadn't gone on, in the first half. I felt like UNT did a really good job of using motion and, quite honestly, just getting those short routes to eat up some yardage and get down the field. And honestly, they just had some good plays here and there where they saw a little break in the coverage, or again, saw that, there was a certain defensive back that was struggling in that series, but didn't really feel like there was necessarily great adjustments going on for Tulane in that moment, but the offense wasn't really giving them a chance to even make substitutions at that point. This is now heading into that onside kick where it's just kind of demoralizing, where you don't even have time to mentally cope with the fact that you've just given up 2 back-to-back touchdowns and now you have to really trot out there again, and then they score again. And the fact that, again, this is not where the sky fell and Tulane just completely crumbled, to me is more promising than anything else. Because now, again, you're at this point where your defense is worn out. The onside kick definitely swung momentum back in their favor. And now they've scored on all 3 of their possessions in the second half at this point. Meanwhile, again, Tulane punted. They did score a touchdown, but back-to-back touchdowns, suddenly you're looking at 28-21. What does the offense do? They go 3 and out again. So again, as much as you can talk about the defense and what they were doing wrong at the end of this game, the offense didn't really help them that much either with 2 3 and outs besides that touchdown drive. This was one of the drives where I was talking about where they took out Hughes, put in Barnes. He didn't really get that far. Just didn't really make sense as to why. And then on the 3rd down play, they had trips formation to the left. And then it just kind of seemed like the routes were a little longer than necessary for what that 3rd down was. And that only took 1 minute and 34 seconds off the clock. This is following those 2 touchdown drives now back to back because of the onside kick. And the defense comes back on, and you know what? They allow a touchdown, but it's the last one of the day. And again, at this point, what really are they supposed to do? Jarius Monroe was actually back in a little bit of that series. And I think that just really spoke to how exhausting that stretch really got for them and trying to kind of stop those gaps. And again, UNT, I thought came in with a really good game plan and really great execution. And they have a really good quarterback. That was a drive where there was a ticky-tacky defensive pass interference call on Tyler Grubbs, where sure, you can talk about, Grubbs playing the man and not playing the ball, but the receiver didn't even know that the ball was coming towards him. He didn't even remotely turn around at all. And so that kind of changes things. But then the offense takes over and they never looked back. And this game honestly never really felt like Tulane was going to lose up until, when it got tied. It was kind of, okay, well, let's see what Tulane's really made of at this point. We can go back to all of these drives. We can go through my hypothetical train. You could go back to games here and there. But when it counts, when the chips are down, when everything's been sliding over to momentum on the other side of the ball, you're at home, the crowd has kind of filtered out at this point. What do? Well, Tulane responds in quite frankly the best drive possible. The way that they methodically marched down the field at the end of the game, the amount of first downs that they got, how on point Michael Pratt suddenly was with his receivers. I mean, again, when he needs to be on, he's on. When this offense needs to perform, they perform. And that's really what matters at the end of the day. And the defense then comes out there and they have to make that stop. Go back to the Ole Miss game where, yeah, they made the stop and then the fourth down play happened. It should have, they called it a false start. Tulane made the stop, if you ask me, and then they, kick a career-long field goal to seal that game. Well, it was the same kind of thing where, okay, the defense has now at this point had 4 drives in this quarter, and they've allowed touchdowns on all 4 of those. The offense has scored twice and punted twice here. So let's hope that the defense makes a stop. And you're still kind of wondering, I think you were a little more confident about the offense at that point, but looking situationally at where this game was, it looked like it's a stop or it's overtime, just kind of based on trying to think of how many timeouts were left towards the end of that game. And Tyler Grubbs makes the play of the game. I say the play of the game because it's the play that effectively ended this game for everyone when he got the first sack of the game on Chandler Jones on first down. And that really just kind of, again, set them back. And he wasn't even supposed to be making a play on that. We talked to him in the post game, but, he kind of said, someone needs to make a play here. Why not me? And I feel like that's the identity that I really saw form out of this game was, yeah, you didn't have your huge playmakers there. You lost, again, your biggest cornerback in Jarius Monroe early on in the game. And it just kind of struggled thereafter on the defensive side, already, again, struggling with some depth along the defensive line. Meanwhile, again, you have a quarterback that, again, is getting the ball out really quickly, and they spread the ball out to a bunch of different receivers and just did a really good job of setting plays up where they'd have a decoy go in motion, and then he'd be the motion man on the next play, get the ball. It just, again, it felt really like they gave Tulane their best shot. And it's safe to say Tulane didn't give North Texas theirs. But at the end of the day, it was a comfortable enough victory where this is what happens when, again, this is what sustaining success looks like. You're realistically, unless you're Georgia or Alabama or what have you, you're not going to have this powerhouse dominant team week after week in the way that you kind of felt about Tulane this time last year in the midst of this magical season. To me, I feel like, again, they've shown more grit, more toughness this season because they don't have those playmakers that you'd think they'd heavily rely on these games. And again, all that to be said, Mekhi Hughes now has 3 weeks in a row with over 100 yards on the ground. You saw Tulane rush the ball 48 times. And again, they rushed it 24 times for North Texas. And just to give credit to the defense here, 83 rush yards on the ground. They had 3 running backs back there. 2 of them are in the top 5 in the conference on rush yards per game. They're second in the conference, averaging 195 rush yards per game, which also is 20th in the nation. Again, 83 yards on the ground by 3 different running backs and their quarterback, who I believe was their second leading, if not their first rusher of the day. So say what you want, again, about the coverage, what have you, but this run defense is here to stay, and they have not shown any signs of needing to question that whatsoever. And so you think about that, you think about the injuries, the context, the situation, how the second half really unfolded. But when it mattered, when it counted, Michael Pratt went out there, he marched his team down the field, and you just, again, never felt like Tulane was going to let this one get away from them, despite all of those kind of blown plays allowing for touchdowns. And again, I think that's a surefire sign of a real football team where you're seeing guys step up. Like, I saw Darius Swanson on the sideline kind of coaching up the defensive back room. It's just, it feels like the players have all really just rallied around each other this year. And the coaches, to their credit too, have kind of stepped back and allowed them to work out a lot of those kinks in real time. I mean, you could have a coach on one hand, all of a sudden just shut down the run game because it's not working, or, decide to commit to the pass to a fault, which I guess works on UNT side, but that's just not really how Tulane is built. And, you set up the run to allow for the pass. And again, ultimately passing against 8 players in coverage. And in one instance, you've already thrown an interception, again, eerily similar to that Kansas State game. And if you have a healthy Michael Pratt, they're probably just running up and down this field. Again, he is healthy, But coming off of all of those weeks of knee braces and what have you, I think too, it's just trusting yourself and your movement. And I think about a lot, talking back to Tajay Spears about coming back from his ACL and the idea that a lot of it is mental. I think that's what you see probably as much as the physical hindrances of these guys coming back from injuries, just that mental side of things. But when it needs to happen, again, this team is just tough through and through. And that starts with the head coach, that starts with your quarterback. And now again, you have your running back one. And I don't know if you can say that you have a running back two, but you can at least say that the race at this point seems to be between Arnold Barnes and Shedro Lewis. We didn't really see much of Shoddy Clayton Johnson in this matchup. We saw him a little more on third down in the Memphis game because he offers a little bit as a receiver, but credit to Mekhi Hughes for 2 catches during this matchup, because that's just something that's really not in his repertoire. Even in practice, that's a lot of those plays go to Arnold Barnes. And as soon as someone gets Arnold Barnes new cleats, I think that you're really looking at a surefire Michael Turner 2.0, because he just hits a hole and he just has such burst. And it's a really good change of pace from Mekhi Hughes, who reminds me a little of Tajay in his patient kind of gliding around the field. But man, I just have never seen someone move piles like I've seen Mekhi Hughes these last few weeks. And, Tulane wins the time of possession. And it just felt like, again, that game, when it came down to it at the end, the offense did what it needed to do. The defense went out there, got a sack when they hadn't been able to really get in that backfield all game. And yeah, they weren't able to record any interceptions, but neither has, all but one team against this North Texas team at this point with the accuracy of Chandler Jones. But again, to shut down that 3-headed rushing attack and make the stops when it matters, that's ultimately what gets you through the stretch towards the end of the year. And ultimately, we're going bowling again. And it's my second season in a row, and that just really can't be understated. And again, I know that there's still this G5 race with Air Force being ranked ahead of Tulane, who did move up in the rankings to 22 and 23 in the AP and coaches poll respectively. Air Force sits ahead of them. And yeah, it was kind of a similar situation last year where it was a little more inter-conference, where we were looking for teams to kind of lose out. But there was more of this idea of just Tulane control their own destiny last year a little more. And I think, again, it just comes down to when you look at the context behind the loss against Southern Miss, and then, eventually a second loss against UCF, and the loss we've seen from Tulane this season coming against Ole Miss and coming in the way that it did. You just really aren't hearing that much about that. It really is just, I know that everyone says it's this 1-0 mentality, and I'm sure, I guess it doesn't get old as long as Tulane keeps winning, but it really just has seemed to, I seem to understand it more and more as the weeks go on each and every week. Because last year I was just kind of felt like I was in a simulation at all times, to be honest with you. Whereas I feel like I've been able to kind of digest each week as it comes a little easier this year and just kind of think about those things. And ultimately, again, at the end of the day, I think that you've seen both sides of the ball struggle in several different games. You've seen probably not a complete game outside of the first matchup against South Alabama for Tulane, but you're probably getting your quarterback back at full health heading into this next week, debatably this week prior. That whole stretch, you're missing him. You're trying to figure out running back one. Got some injuries over on the defensive side of the ball. And again, still only one loss to show for all of that. And at the end of the day, the offense scored 35 points. And I felt like this time last year, and you go back to that Kansas State win, 17-10. I mean, that's, as a defense lover, love those types of scores, but objectively, it's not that great of an offensive showing. But 35 points, I believe 3 passing touchdowns, 1 to Keys, 2 to Alex Bauman, and then a rushing touchdown by Pratt and Mekhi Hughes, and that's spreading the ball out all over the field. You would want to probably see guys like Keith Brown, who we saw involved a lot more against Memphis, get targeted a lot more in this game. And just, ultimately, when you're only attempting 21 passes, there's only so much that can really get spread out to. When 2 of those are to Mekhi Hughes, 2 of them are to Alex Bauman, now you're really just splitting up between a really strong receiving core, not that many touches, but Tulane needs to get back to running the football. And it's something that they've struggled with in the, not so much struggled with, but outside of Mekhi Hughes. And it's kind of been on the O-line just as much. I thought that was the best performance by the offensive line since the season opener, to be honest with you. I thought Sincere Haynesworth had an incredible matchup. And for Tulane to just be able to absorb these injuries, the toughness of Josh Remitich to go through all that he went through on the field last week against Memphis, and Chaudre Hurst at left guard, too, has been such a key point of depth where you don't have to rush back Prince Pines, and then you have arrested Prince Pines. Then if something happens on the other side, you know that you have a really versatile piece in Chaudre Hurst, and we've seen Trey Tuggle come in on a few plays. It just, to me, that was really the best performance by the O-line so far, and that's the most important part of the offense at the end of the day. You could argue quarterback, but you could have the best quarterback in the world. Doesn't matter if your O-line can't block, can't make a pocket, and can't set up lanes for the run game. Well, you saw a great pocket, and you saw some serious run lanes, especially in the second half, really open up for Mekhi Hughes, Arnold Barnes, and Shedra Lewis, who I thought had one of his better outings as a running back as well. And so, again, for all those struggles to still culminate in a victory that, yeah, was ultimately one score, but still never really felt like Tulane let the game get out of hand, save for that little onside kick shenanigans. I think it says more about Tulane that despite allowing touchdown, they never faltered and ultimately made that stop at the end, knowing that their offense would be able to go out there and put points on the board, and then feeling confident that their defense would be able to make that stop. That's all you can ask for. It's all I can ask for. And I am happy to walk away from homecoming with, again, 1-0 victory. Looking forward to a bowl game here in December and wherever we end up traveling, and looking forward to a new conference opponent this weekend as we head over to Rice. So again, these new conference opponents have definitely been giving Tulane their best shot, and I respect them all really very much for it. But Tulane has some bigger things to handle this year, and 1-0 will take care of all that. So with that, y'all, see you on Friday.